Also, for me, thank you very much for the invitation, being here, and the chance to bring drawings to the table, but also ideas and readings to the table. So the central paper I chose, the drawing I chose, is here. I'm quite mesmerized to see it now.
First time? First time?
First time. So it's a drawing of Charles Rouault de Fleury, and he made his sketch for the competition for the opera in Paris in 1861. He was a French architect, and he designed and he built many buildings in Paris in the 19th century, such as the Galerie de Minéralogie et Géologie, also the Mexican Hut House, also the Monkey House, and the Jardin des Plantes, and several hospitals, so different things. And what I find very, very interesting, and I will touch on that later on, is that he first studied to be a sculptor, and then afterwards he switched to architecture. So Rouault de Fleury, he was part of a team that designed also the Grand Hôtel du Louvre in Paris, which opened in 1855, so before this drawing, and just in time for the Exposition Universelle that year. And the team was led by Alfred Armand, but most important, there was someone else in the team, and that was Jacques-Ignace Hittorf. And what is so important is the contact between Charles Rouault and Hittorf for me in reading this drawing, because Hittorf, he made a very relevant contribution to the archaeological debates in the 19th century on a European scale, inspiring but justifying above all the frequent use of polychromy and mural painting in mid-19th century architecture. So this particular drawing of Charles Rouault de Fleury, he is executed in black and red ink, and also black, brown, and pink washes. So it's very toned down. It's a drawing that, for me, in my reading, it really shows the fragile vigor of the surface, and I'm going to explain. It's totally different than, for example, this drawing he also made for an unknown opera, because this is very exuberantly polychrome, and that one is very subdued, and therefore, for me, has a much more essential approach. So it kind of unlocks a special world in which also the gravity of the building kind of evaporates. So there's no weight, there's no gravity. It's not black, the walls and where he cuts it. So if he would have included the mass of the build in this drawing, it would have communicated something totally different. So now he denies the solid and the weight, and in doing so, he makes a very conscious but also palpable statement about the importance of the surface that you encounter and the soul of the surface. And I was thinking, might we think that maybe his training as a sculptor gave him a kind of specific sense and also appreciation for the surface that you release from the stone, because a sculptor has a very strong intuition, which idea he will kind of liberate from the stone, and the surface between full and between void is the instrument in this. And for example, I was some weeks ago at the Belvedere, and I saw this process in Vienna unfolding as it were live in this sculpture by Rodin, the Danaïde. So it's really kind of emerging from the stone. And the interface between air and stone contains the quintessence, so really the essence. Returning to the drawing, so in this drawing, he only captures the surfaces of the different spaces. And the spaces themselves, they reveal them as a kind of set of shades, textures, very restrained colors, and also ornaments in the plane. So it's a kind of paper stretched layer on the sheet that stages the walls as protagonists in a sequence of experiences when you go through it. And in that very special way, through hue setting, delineation or confluence, also shadow orientation, for me, he doesn't translate the colors that can be seen on the wall in real time, but how the emotional arrangement of spaces, they kind of reveal themselves in the visitor's experience. And when we look at 3 moments I've picked out, I try to explain how I read this drawing. So the first moment is the transition between the hall here and the scene. And for me, he kind of shows how the story on the scene and the spectator's experience, they kind of flow together. And in a very, very basic way, I'm going to try to capture what is happening here for me. And I hope it works, because when you're nervous, it's always difficult. So there's a scene and there's a hall and there's a kind of color and ornamentation that continues in the hall. I'm going to do it in a quick way. So, well, I have to do it upside down, I think. But then again, all of a sudden, in the drawing, he immediately superimposes this shadow. It's a kind of illumination that comes from the back scene. So I'm just going to give that a try. So as the basic idea. And for me, light from the back scene is unlikely in the opera. But through this kind of graphic elaboration, he ensures that the shades, they kind of coexist and they exist over and under each other. And those two worlds, the worlds of the spectator and the scene, they kind of blend together in that kind of graphical way. So the hue setting between both spaces is different. It's not overdone in sharpness, or the delineation is very soft. So he kind of graphically shows a soft bank between the two worlds that come together, from the spectator and from the artists on the scene. And then the second moment is the moment here at the balconies. So I give there a zoom. And here at the balconies, just do it in a very, very simple way. You have, well, it's this moment. You have one kind of shade and hue, and then you have this one. But in my idea, he really leaves the balconies quite neutral. So there's not that much color, only shadow. So it's almost a kind of neutrality between very elaborate and colored zones. And we could again read this as an expression of an intention there. So it is as if the spectator's own world there does not receive any interpretation, so it stays neutral on the balcony. Because after all, in experience, he must be kind of sucked into the story and the animosity of the opera with his full being. And his own world there, it doesn't matter. And in leaving the paper blank, he kind of emphasizes the sensation for me. And here I'm also strongly reminded of the German word for to emphasize, namely betonen, because that contains really so much, because color shades and tones, even sounds, also are translated by the German word tone. So this makes that in this word betonen, there is a whole perception of sounds and tones that play a role in accentuating something, or in this case, in their absence, like in this moment, they ignore something. And I find it always very wonderful to find his kind of levels in a sense of language. And then the last moment, number 3, yeah, it's this one here. I'm just going to do it first. I'm going to finish off later, but it has to dry a little bit. So this moment here, the access corridors, behind the balconies, we kind of find an entirely separate world, because these kind of spacious hallways, they really bathe in an intimate, in a warm, in a darker glow that we cannot really find else on the drawing, only just here. Whereas in moment 1, both zones were allowed to kind of influence each other and the area of the scenes. And in moment 2, yeah, you have the really neutrality between those two moments. Here you have the expression of very enormous individuality of that space behind the balconies. And the edges to the adjacent rooms are very different, especially in the lower corridor here with the entrance door. I'm just going to try. So, because here he has taken enough time here to let the ink, let the nuance really dry into the paper, so that no blurring or frayed edges appear. So he really wants to kind of cut off this very individual world of these corridors behind the balconies. So they want to capture the visitor completely in an experience as a kind of ouverture or a postlude after the opera. And there's really no escape, so you get completely immersed in that world. So for me, this drawing of Charlot de Fleury acknowledges the animated wall as a fragile, but also as a fragile vigor in the build. It highlights the role and the power of a kind of added layer to the building. And in its subtlety lies both the strength and also the fragility, because the focus on the skin between emptiness and solid can inspire us also in sustainability and circularity. It's a kind of idea, because in respect of every form of stored energy, we are searching and we are striving to demolish and to rebuild as little as possible. And in doing so, we aim to create a kind of intelligent, solid carcasses, or thinking about it, if that could be one of the options. And that can sustain itself for as long as possible. But I think something is missing then there. And maybe the animation of the wall as a kind of layer of hue, chroma-composition, ornament and texture can be a kind of meaningful, very temporal component in this. And the commitment to the value and the opportunities that lie in that soul of the surface, they ensure that the spaces kind of wrap around you, semper in mind, as a kind of tangible, very distinctive experience. So whereas the carcass is very robust and timeless, you have this thin layer that can kind of excel in being quite defenseless and a kind of touch in the fragment of time again and again. And maybe therein lies its value and strength also. And to close down, I want to end with a quote of the Dutch poet Lucebert that I love very much. And he says, "Everything of value is defenseless, becomes rich in tangibility, like the heart of time." Thank you very much.